Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ancient Warfare Answers, where me, Murray, tries to answer your questions, and I'll do my best, to a question that you've asked about ancient warfare. So you can have a weekly 10-minute or longer, if I'm not verbose, if I'm too verbose, longer or shorter on ancient warfare, your fix for the week on ancient warfare, with me mumbling away. You, of course, can ask us a question. You can send us an email, a message. You can send us a telegram. Can you send telegrams anymore? I'm not sure. You can send us a postcard. You can send us a letter. However you like getting hold of it. You can stop us in the street. I've only had one of those. That's fascinating. You have to be in Sydney, Australia to be able to stop me in the street. And, of course, recognise me. Anyway, today's question is coming from Jacob, and I'm going to try and answer that one. And, of course, you can ask a question on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Ancient Warfare Podcast. There's 3 different levels you can back us at. Anyway, Jacob's question is, I am wondering if field artillery was ever used against a Macedonian-style phalanx. If not, why not? It seems like the close formation and immobility of the phalanx would leave it extremely susceptible to scorpion ballista fire, etc. Thank you so much. Now, so firstly, I disagree that the phalanx was immobile. Originally, under Philip and Alexander, the phalanx is an incredibly flexible and mobile unit. It becomes immobile. One of the biggest issues for the successors and the diadochi in the Hellenistic age, so from the death of Alexander 323 BC to the defeat of Mark Antony in 31 BC, is that they essentially are inward-looking against one another, and so you find phalanx versus phalanx, and so they become these sort of behemoths that are immobile. But originally, it's not intended to be immobile. And in fact, even in the most famous victories of the Roman legion against the phalanx at both Caesarea and Pydna, the phalanx is on the move. In one case, it splits in half and gets defeated, and in the other, of course, it moves into terrain which is unsuitable to it. So they are moving when they are defeated. But this idea of why don't we see artillery against them? And I think that comes down to a different kind of idea, and that is that the later Roman association, generally under Julius Caesar, and possibly earlier in the Republic, that there's a sort of a set number of artillery pieces attached to a legion, and this is, by the book, is probably a little bit inaccurate. That by the book is a very modern idea, and even though we actually have ancient books, on paper, the legion would have looked very, very different to in the field. And so probably a field legion army isn't necessarily going to have these units of artillery as standard practice. And at every battle that a legion fights, you're not going to see these things because we're mobile, we're marching, we may have, met with privation and being starved. So the idea that you're going to have this paper, yes, here's our piece of artillery, isn't necessarily the case. And indeed, we don't find the sources mentioning the use of artillery against any densely packed enemy formation. Of course, we do have archaeological evidence, especially from Britain and Germany, I think, of artillery bolts being stuck in bodies and bones and spines and leg bones. So we do find that, and heads, yes, but not quite in as much detail as we would think, but grisly still. Now, interestingly, I say interestingly, because in the last Ancient Warfare Answers, I brought up the fact that Philip of the Macedon, Alexander's father, was defeated, and he's only defeated by one man, whose name was Onomachus of Phocis. Now, I bring up Onomachus of Phocis because there's a battle where Onomachus defeats Philip. Very vague details on these in Diodorus and also Polyaenus of Macedon, which is why I like it, because I like Polyaenus of Macedon. And anyway, in one of these battles, Polyaenus tells us, for those of you following along at home, it's Polyaenus' Stratagems, Book 2, Stratagem 38, number 2. And anyway, it says that when Onomachus was fighting the Macedonians, he took up a position with a steep and craggy mountain to his rear, and on top of the mountain, he placed in ambush a number of men who were expert in throwing stones, with a large supply of huge stones and pieces of jagged rock for this purpose. He then advanced, formed up his army on the plain. The Macedonians began to attack with their javelins. The Phocians pretended they were unable to resist and retreated halfway up the mountain. The Macedonians eagerly pursued them until they came within reach of the men in ambush, who then emerged and started to attack the Macedonian phalanx with these huge stones. This then defeated Philip. Now, interestingly, that defeat of Philip is interpreted by some to be artillery, that there's an artillery placement on the hill and it's able to defeat the phalanx. Now, of course, fascinatingly, it's not then emulated by anyone. There's an interesting emulation by Philip at the Battle of Chaeronea, where he withdraws from the Athenian advance up a hill, and then at the right moment in time turns around and says charge, and he charges back, and the Athenian pursuit has been disrupted, which I think is a lesson he learns from Onomarchus at this particular moment. So the interesting thing here is these stones are not described as artillery pieces. They're not described as field artillery, and it would be very early for field artillery, even in the 4th century BC. They're described as expert in throwing stones, and they have a huge supply of stones and jagged rock. Now, experts in throwing stones is odd, because that's obviously normally a role that is given to psiloi, light-armed troops who can't afford weapons. So expert in throwing stones seems a very highfalutin way of referring to the lowest grade of troops. It could be rolling stones, as in they've set up an ambush whereby the stones can be, as we've seen in lots of films, unleashed, even the Ewoks. We can unleash those stones by knocking them out, and they're going to roll down a particular way. That would require some kind of expertise. But again, it's not really artillery. It is more of an ambushy thing, certainly up a mountain, and that is certainly going to cause devastation to densely packed infantry chasing him. But it's not artillery, I don't think. And so the question, as you ask, then, why is there not more artillery in the field against the Macedonian phalanx, or indeed against any closely packed enemy unit? You would think that any battle where you have the Romans or the Greeks or the Macedonians getting into a tighter formation, and we have lots and lots of source material which talks about they got into close formation at this point. Synopismos in the Greek, and we have lots of, the testudo is probably the most famous in Latin sources, but there are other phrases too for close order rather than loose order. Why you wouldn't make your enemy get into that formation and then unleash some kind of attack on them, a la Spartacus with the rolling, burning, whatever those were in the film, which there's no historical source for. But, even, for instance, at the Battle of Adrianople, where we know that the Gothic wagon lager is on a hill, and the Romans, we're told by Ammianus, come into close order, and they advance. Why wouldn't you unleash a wagon filled with stones, or just a wagon, into that formation? It would cause havoc, and that we're not told that happening. The basic answer is we don't know, which is always annoying and dissatisfying. But interestingly, I think it's because field artillery isn't really a thing at this point. It becomes a thing, and it becomes a... But again, even in the sources where we know it's a thing, they're not really mentioned very often. And so is it as common a thing as we're shown and told on paper in the field? And I would say probably not. That the actual logistics of getting these machines with the army and into place is less likely than we might think. So yes, a very dissatisfying answer, which is, of course, as far as we know, no. And when we can say maybe, it's probably not. That's very dissatisfying. But I hope that answers your question. Join us again for another Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.